Hello and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. 2022 is a year when India expects to come out of the slowdown that it suffered on account of Corona in the past 2 years. This pandemic has had its impact on many industries, and the MSME industry has been impacted the most. But because we are heading into the union budget, and it is a very important event of the year, so we're going to discuss the expectations of the industry from the union budget. Today on the show, among others, we also have Gopal Krishna Agarwal, who, as we all know, is the chief economic spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party. On the 16th of January, had a meeting with the finance minister, and a lot of measures and inputs were given to the finance minister for the budget, which I think we will like to bring up in the course of the show. I welcome Gopal Agarwalji to the show. Also joining us is Mr. Multani. He is the president of the PhD Chambers of Commerce, which has been very vocal in taking up issues pertaining to the industry. And Mohit Saraf, who heads a firm called Saraf and Partners, also joins us today. Welcome all three of you. And I will first request Mr. Gopal Agarwal to lay the ground for our today's discussion, and then we will move ahead. The floor is yours, Mr. Agarwal. Can you lay the ground for today's show?
Thank you, Tarunji. And today, as this is a pre-budget discussion, and you have asked us to focus on some of the MSME sectors, small industries, businesses, etc. And we have representations from PhD, which is representing most of the medium and small industries in addition to large industries also. And Mr. Mohit Saraf, so we will definitely have a good outcome of what the industries expect. I think about my discussions, as you mentioned, we had a long discussion from the party side on 16 January with the finance minister. And earlier also, I had been involved into various discussions for the economic recovery post-pandemic from the party side, and talking to stakeholders and getting the feel of it. There is a general feeling that I get out of my discussions. There was 25 states were represented, and 2-3 people from all the states, each state were present there, from industries, academicians, business community, and even economists were also there. The general feeling is that the post-pandemic, the economic recovery is on a fast track. And that confidence is shown by the industry, not only domestically, but even global investors are very confident that India's economy is poised for a good quantum leap, and good jump is going to be there in the coming future. And therefore, a lot of investment, even FDI and other investment into stock market is also coming. But there are certain challenges which the government should be quite active on in this budget, which have to be met. And once any government, because I am involved into various policy suggestions from the party side, I make it a point that we should always underline some challenges. And we should also tell that people also should know that these challenges are known to the government. Government is working on those challenges. So for the background for today's discussion, I would like to mention that we know that post-pandemic, government measures on Atmanirbhar Bharat and other fiscal stimulus packages like PLI and other thing, and increasing the import duty, getting out of FTA and not signing RCEP. But that has created good ecosystem of business for large and big industries. But MSME and informal sector is having certain major challenges that should be met in this budget. And those challenges include like high cost of commodity prices, which has seen steel, cement, plastic, aluminium, other base metal raw materials. Their prices have increased a lot, and that is hurting the MSME sector. Second is the NPA recognition. That is also a concern for the MSME sector. And the third important challenge that is coming out is about the credit availability, working capital requirement is all right. But the thing is that the demand which the government is creating through government expenditure is fine, but the private demand is not getting generated. So these are the 3-4 challenges that there is a consensus that we are working on, and we have also been in discussion with the government. Finally, what the government decides is for the finance minister and the prime minister to look into, but these challenges are well underlined from our side. So I think with this opening remark, we can carry on the discussions.
As Mr. Agarwal said, private demand has to be revived. And taking on this, I'll go to Mr. Multani. Now, there are 3 things to consider. You're talking of about 6 crore 30 lakh MSME units in the country. And on the other side, they are employing about 14 to 15 crore people and contributing 50% to India's export quota. They were in some sort of a problem after the GST rollout also. And then the pandemic struck. So they are, in a sense, having double problems. Secondly, because of the faceless tax assessment system now, many times demands are put and they have to, under protest, pay 20% of whatever is demanded. So working capital is also getting blocked. So there are problems on the tax front, the GST front, and the pandemic. What as PhD have you proposed to help the industry get out of this?
You see, basically, the major issue which the industry is facing today is that we would like the budget to refuel the consumption demand, because there is very low demand for the products of the MSMEs. So that is one thing which we are looking at, and we hope we will get from the budget. Apart from that, what we also would like is hassle-free credit availability should be there for the industry. Because right now, there is, while the government has given good, this emergency credit line guarantee scheme, this we would like to be extended. It is valid till 31st March 23. We would like it to be extended further, for further periods. Because otherwise, right now, what is happening is the finance to the MSMEs is a very, very major issue. We are, the banks are still insisting on collaterals despite the government, having that, conveying them, okay, no, give them loans on easy terms. As MSMEs, we are also would definitely like stability of taxes. We just hope and pray the taxes don't get tinkered with at all. And if possible, if there is scope to lower taxes with wider coverage, because right now we find that too few people are paying taxes. Why should more people not be under the tax net, and limited people are, are there in the tax circle? So if you can work on that. And there should be great focus on ease of doing business and reduce costs of doing business. These are major concerns for the industry. Also, a cost-effective logistics network would provide impetus to an MSME sector in the country by making MSMEs competitive internationally. It is suggested that the logistics costs in the country should be reduced from the current level of 14% of GDP. And on the taxation front, we appreciate the reduction in the corporate tax from peak rate of more than 30% to effective rate of around 25%. However, as majority of MSMEs are either sole proprietorships or partnerships, therefore the taxes should come down on these type of businesses going forward. Because, PhD-CCI suggests that it is, that the maximum slab be brought down to 25% for these, partnerships, LLPs and proprietorships also, because majority of MSMEs are these. And we would also request that, the new units, the government has suggested for new units, the effective rate of tax is around 17%. So we suggest to enable the entities to take benefit of section 115 BAB. The time limit allowed to start manufacturing by new unit may be extended by at least 24 months. The new unit should be permitted to start manufacturing by 31st March 2025. Because thanks to this pandemic, things could not move forward. And I think this is a very wonderful facility of the government. And of course, when we talk about exports, if exports have to be given a boost, export income for MSMEs should be made tax-free for the next 3 years. That will be a big help, because all the input costs have increased drastically, and this will help in offsetting all the, high expenses which have come forward. And further, as the raw material prices have increased significantly during the last 1 year, these suggest that on the raw materials for manufacturer, the applicable basic custom duty needs to be reduced by 50%. This is to promote Make in India and cost competitiveness for domestic manufacturers.
Point well taken. I'll go to Mr. Mohit Saraf right now. Coming out of the pandemic, the most commonly affected industry that we see is tourism, hospitality, airlines, aviation is under major stress. So in the budget, there will be some expectations from this sector. Also, the point that Mr. Multani brought out of access to credit and top-up loans is something that a lot of industry would be looking forward to. Do you concur with this, and what are your inputs for this budget?
I would say, I think Mr. Agarwal mentioned about government thinking on the budget, and Mr. Multani mentioned about MSME and their requirements. From a macro perspective, I think what we really look from a budget is three things, which is very critical. The first is the fiscal deficit consolidation part. I think that's a very important part. If you remember, in 2021, because of pandemic, our fiscal deficit went up to 9%, 9.2% of the GDP number. And I think it is expected that this year it will be around 6.4. And this has been supported by very, I would say, good recovery in the economy. GST collections have been $1.3 trillion. Our exports have been all-time high. I think the tax net has increased to all-time high. So I would say these tax revenues have gone up. And I think what the market is looking at is, and being a part of FICCI, I are expecting is that there will be a consolidation and gradual reduction to fiscal deficit. That's the number one part. The number two is really the government has been very clear about that they have to get the growth cycle, growth of GDP on through investment cycle. And I think this has been done both at the private sector and at the public sector. If you look at the public sector, government made it a mandatory for every PSU, if they have surpluses business money, that they should invest and do CapEx. And I would say if you look at the national infrastructure pipeline, the Gati Shakti, all these things are very positive thing to build public-private partnership and build world-quality infrastructure. Even setting up the National Bank for Infrastructure Financing is a very positive thing. On the private side, I think that's an important part. The government has supported the private CapEx cycle through PLI. And I think for 13 sectors, they have done that. And I would say it's been a phenomenon. I think today the GST numbers and export numbers are largely showing the buoyancy created by PLI, and now the semiconductors issues have been doing. But I think what is very important, and I think we heard Mr. Agarwal and Mr. Multani saying that ease of doing business is very, very important, and cost of doing business. From a FICCI perspective, we always look at cost of doing business and ease of doing business. We have really significantly improved on the World Bank ranking, but we are still 63 out of 190. And I think that is an important part which Mr. Modi himself has led. And I would say there's a very big requirement that we have to move on ease of doing business right to the top 30. And I think that's an important part. And very equally important, and being a lawyer, I feel that today when foreigners, whether it's an FIIs, private equity money, venture capital money, everybody is suffering in India is because of enforceability of contract. Courts are overburdened, no dispute get resolved. And we actually are 163 out of 190 nation on enforceability of contract. And since Mr. Agarwal is here, we should look at that. And this is something which required, because right now we can get trillions of dollars if people can feel that the disputes will get settled very fast. So I would say to get a CapEx cycle particularly private cycle. PLI is a very positive thing, but the government should focus on getting the enforcement of contract and ease of doing business improved. And one very important part, because if you remember, Mr. Agarwal, that 70% of the debt you require for any project. And therefore, it is very important in this budget that the government looks at the bond issue, the tax on the bond issues, because it's a big requirement that Indian bonds get issued in the global indices, because that can lead to almost a $250 billion of inflow into India. And this will reduce cost of capital for banks and for MSME and for corporates. And this is a very, very important part. And the third very important part, which the corporate is looking at, is basically the goal on privatization. If you look at last 1 year, government has been working very hard, but a large part of the income has come from dividend and from FPO, and small part has come from strategic disinvestment. And again, it's a very good thing Air India has happened, but I think what is important require is government should get out of the business of owning asset. They should build asset and sell assets. They should recycle asset. And I think that's the thought process they should do it. And I think that the entire policy of recycling asset is very, very commendable. And government should make sure that in next 1 year, there should be huge number of private strategic disinvestment, just not FPO. Because if you see Vedanta, the amount of growth, job, taxes which Vedanta paid after it went to the private sector is an important part, because setting up new businesses is very difficult in India. But if government sells existing businesses, then the growth can be very, I would say, front-loaded and very quick. And that is an important part we expect the finance minister to look into in this budget.
Point well taken. I'll go to Mr. Gopal Agarwal. In the infrastructure space, there was this talk of a lot of highways being bid out for operating to the private sector. Can we see that some big announcements in the infrastructure space? And secondly, on access to credit, if you can enlighten us in terms of what is the government thinking, any inputs from your side? And also the bond issue that Mr. Saraf raised, can we look at some global bond where we raise capital from global markets and invest in this country?
There are many important points have been raised by Mr. Mohit and Mr. Pradeep Multani ji. And I agree to a very large extent on many issues which have been pointed out. That the credit availability, capital investment, privatization of PSUs, and the goal of privatization, why the government has to be in the field of doing business. And I agree with that. And therefore, when BPCL is on the cards of disinvestment, government is very much interested that this should go before this financial year, but I don't think it will be possible for this, but LIC IPO is there. There was a lot of reservations even from many of our own associate organization about Air India being disinvested. So our commitment to disinvestment stands. And one thing I had a detailed discussion, that is that our goal for disinvestment, where some people are thinking that our goal for disinvestment is generating fiscal revenue for the government. It is not like that. We want to bring efficiency into the operations at one part of time. And second is better utilization of government capital. As Mr. Mohit has said, that government should build assets and disinvest. And I very much agree with you, Mohit, that contract enforceability is an important part. When I meet international investors, those who want to set up industries in India, they also have certain reservations, though we have a very strong judicial system. But contract enforceability, and we have, as far as ease of doing business, also our ranking on contract enforceability and tax compliance is low in comparison to many other 8 parameters out of this 10. So we agreed. And I think one thing that we have identified in our discussion is that the contract design capability whenever is lacking. So when Tarunji, you are asking, we have seen that many of the PPP models are failing because of the design of contract is not proper. We have low capacity in the government and into the private sector also, who can design good and efficient contracts, and therefore so many litigations are happening. So this area of concern has been identified, though it is not a part of the budget, but when the Prime Minister says that we want a lateral entry into the bureaucratic setup also, this is one of the major concerns, that we need technical people should get into the administrative services who have more knowledge and have ground connect with the business environment. Pure academicians or economists, etc., though they are very much needed and they are very helpful in policy making, but more input from the industry's partners is there. And we are also looking for the efficient operations of the tribunals. Tribunal is one area. I have been talking to HM also that we have to increase the stakeholders' participation in tribunal, because whenever there is a decision, whenever a policy is made, the government input from the administrative side is already there. And judicial intervention or judicial review is also there. But what is lacking is that in the policy making, the stakeholders' issues. And that can come if we have efficient tribunals where stakeholders' participation is increased. So we are looking into that area also. And but this is another area of concern. What I think is about the credit, the government, and it is mainly by the RBI. And we have been interacting with the RBI. I was on the board of Bank of Baroda also, and I was working on the merger of various banks also. When I was heading the committee, which in the first when Vijay Bank and Dena Bank was merged with our Bank of Baroda, that time I was heading the audit committee, and I was looking into that merger aspect. What I found was that the credit availability and thing is there, implementation level is lacking. So when Pradeep ji is saying that the banks are still asking for collateral, and they are reluctant to give loans without collateral, even though the government is doing so. One thing has been pointed out to us is the credit guarantee. Government should efficiently improve more, allocate more fund on the credit guarantee schemes, so that banks are their resistance or reluctance on financing without collateral goes away. So this is one area, Mr. Pradeep, you can also put forth that credit guarantee allocation of fund can be increased. On the Moiji, I'm not very sure. We did try on the bond issue, global sovereign bond issue. And that time in the last budget, the finance minister did announce that we will go for sovereign bond issue. But that time finance secretary was Mr. Subhash Garg was there. He was also very favorable to this sovereign bond, but the government did not go through it because there were two concerns. One thing was, we were earlier thinking that foreign currency fluctuations and the risk involved is too high in sovereign debt bond. And that is one area of concern which the government later on felt about. And second thing was about the working of the credit agency. Global credit agencies are not transparent. That I'm very sure because I have been working with them. The global credit agencies, the role of global credit agency becomes very much impactful on if we expose our bond markets to global foreign currency and sovereign debt bonds. So that issue is not resolved, and that creates a big sudden because when we studied 2008 financial crisis and later on also, we found that many of the countries were at a loss because of the role of the global credit agency, which suddenly gave a different rating, and suddenly the cost of funds, etc., and the certain countries were caught off guard. So this issue is there. So I think we can go for rupee denominator masala bonds sort of thing. I think that last budget we did announce about that, so we can go. But as far as foreign currency, sovereign debt bonds in foreign currency, or completely liberalizing, that will make a complete capital account convertibility. Our economy at present, many in the government think that is not at present that much.
Mr. Agarwal, Tarun, can I just respond to things? I think what we are talking, I think you're absolutely correct, and I understand about the sovereign bond issue. But I think what the corporate India and the banks in India are talking about is basically the Indian bonds. Basically, there are global bonds, global indices. Now, that is not sovereign issue. This is basically a double taxation issue, that the foreign debt providers do not have to pay tax. That's the only thing which is holding on. If that can be sorted out in the budget, it can lead to a $250 billion of inflow into India. That's number one. And number two, as Mr. Agarwal, you will appreciate that particularly when the Fed is on the verge of increasing interest rate, the US dollar will strengthen. And this money, if it flows, it will help us to maintain our rupee. So it's a very important bar, and it will also help the bank, because the banks are raising money. Corporates are raising money. So this is going to be a very significant for corporate India, particularly because you want capex cycle in the private sector. That's number one. Number two, you very correctly said that design of contracts, the PPPs are wrong. And absolutely, I agree with you. I remember to be in London, and at that time the Planning Commission was designing the model concession agreement, and I worked very closely with Planning Commission on that. And we were there in London City, and we were discussing on a panel discussion. And I said to the member is that really what you're doing is your concession agreements are so faulty that the entire PPP has become only contractors' business, because people are only doing contracting. And that is the reason. You're absolutely correct. The design of the PPP model can be a model on which you can do a non-recourse, limited recourse financing. And that is what is required. And today, when we have to move from, in the Prime Minister's view, when we want to move from $2.8 trillion to $10 trillion in the next 10 years, I would say we require a proper design of the transaction document, the concession agreement, the PPP model. And I think this is required. Otherwise, we will only get to 50 or 30% of this whole thing. And absolutely correct. And I think in my view, there are enough people, smart people on this who understand this business. And the government has to follow, because really at the end of the day, what the government should think about it is you need so much of infrastructure. Right now, if you look at it, 55 cents is required to build $1 of GDP. That's what the credit requirement from the banks is, 55 cents to 1. Because if you remember a few years back, it used to be $1.50 required to build one additional GDP. So there is a lot of efficiency. But to build that $10 trillion which we are talking about, we need huge amount of it. And therefore, you're absolutely correct. The design of the PPP have to be correct, which is not there today. And that is the reason if you feel that very limited foreign investors are participating, and most infrastructure companies, including banks who funded these projects, are stressed.
Point well taken. For one final comment, let me go to Mr. Multani. We saw that faulty PPP contracts ended in a lot of litigation, which we now see pan-India. A lot of payments are stuck to contractors. Contractors also have suffered in many cases. Many cases, government has a right point that, but if the document itself is faulty, then you can't go back on that. From PSD side, would you expect that the government comes out with fresh model contracts that become standard all over the country in certain cases? And secondly, one final point I would like you to address is, as far as the working of commercial courts is concerned, do you think we should speed up that process so that disputes don't linger on endlessly in courts and working capital gets blocked and people can't pay their loans, which is businesses. They can't pay their loans if, even NHAI contracts, you see so much litigation in NHAI.
I strongly would recommend the government to double the, whatever the present litigation, the courts which are there, they should double the number of courts. Because even if we have the best contracts, we've got such smart lawyers that they can still go and make cases, delay. What is actually needed if our country has to really move forward? Of course, all the vacancies in the courts should be filled up, all the priority. And I'm saying, let there be double number of courts which are there, because we must get justice within 6 to 9 months. While again, I repeat, while fully respecting all our lawyers, the geniuses they are, the best, contracts can also be delayed, unfortunately. And another thing which I would definitely like is, because I would like to come back to that important issue of credit availability. Some sort of security must be provided to the bankers also, because they're so scared that, believe me, sometimes one thinks that are these bankers actually here to finance industry? One still feels they are more like that gaon ka jo hota hai na sahukar, who's giving, if you want 1 crore worth of limits, he will take 5 crores worth of your assets. Now, this sort of thing should be looked into, and some encouragement should be given to these bankers also. Some sort of security should be provided to them. 2 things I would like to please mention here. One is that it is very important to get the petroleum products under the GST. We have no issue with the high prices, because we know very few people pay taxes, are in the direct taxes in the direct taxes basket. So let them at least contribute on the indirect taxes. But at least for industry to be competitive, the taxes we have paid on the petroleum products, we should get input tax credit on that. So if that intent can be, I know it is a GST council thing, but if the budget can at least push it that yes, the central government means it, and then let it be an agenda coming forward where these days we become totally unviable because of the high petroleum products cost.
Point well taken.
एक तरुण जी, एक 2 बात छोटी सी मैं यहाँ कह दूं. One thing is GST के बारे में I just want to inform one thing. I think everybody must be knowing that the average net tax revenue under GST, when the GST was formalized, it was thought to be, it will stabilize around 15 to 16%. But at present, due to successive reduction in indirect taxes, it is around 11 and 12%. Though GST is increasing, but it is not just increasing because formalization of more and more businesses is taking place. Actually, the tax collection is revenue neutrality of 15% is not being achieved. So one thing I just want to just put it into your domain knowledge, which is a concern for the government. And second important point is a suggestion Pradeep ji has come to me, that can the payment to MSME be brought under some section 143 or kuch hoga shayad Mohit ji, where any payment or revenue or anything, if it is not done within the time limit for tax, it is not allowed as an expenditure to the corporate sector. So you can ask for that. Some people have recommended, I think that can be looked into, that any payment beyond 90 days, or you can increase it to 150 days or 180 days to MSME may be disallowed as an expenditure. So that will, a lot of money I have found that of the MSME sector is locked down into various large companies and even PSUs and other departments.
Thank you so much. It was a very fruitful discussion today. Part 2 of this expectations from the budget we'll do next week. I would like to thank Mr. Gopal Agarwal, Mr. Multani, Mr. Mohit Saraf for joining us. Appreciate for your sharing us your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.